Good afternoon. This is Councilmember Shepherd, and we are here today for a work session on justice reform. So I welcome everyone to the meeting. Ms. Lindo, are you there? And
good afternoon, Madam Chair. Yes.
Can we do a roll call?
Yes, we have Councilmember Ide, Councilmember Shook, Councilmember Smith, Councilmember Michael Julian Bond, and Council President Felicia Moore on the line, and Councilmember Westmoreland, Madam Chair, and JP Malkite, Councilmember Malkite.
Okay, thank you so much. We will now have you to read our remote public meeting statement, Ms. Lindo.
Yes, good afternoon. Today's Public Safety and Legal Administration Committee work session will be conducted remotely as advertised and in accordance with the Georgia Code Section 50-14-1. The public may access the meeting conference bridge toll-free by dialing 877-579-6743 and entering conference ID number 831-599-1256. This information was also posted in a public notice that was published on the City Council website at citycouncil.atlanta.ga.gov and distributed on Monday, March 1st, 2021. The public may also view the meeting on Channel 26, the Council's homepage at citycouncil.atlanta.ga.gov, Facebook and Twitter pages at ATL Council, and the Council's YouTube channel. Today's presentation is also available on the Atlanta City Council website on the Public Safety and Legal Administration Committee presentation page. The public is able to submit comments via voicemail at 404-330-6092 yesterday between the hours of 4 and 7 p.m. These comments will be played during the public comment portion of the meeting. All persons present on the meeting conference bridge are requested to please mute your phones and speakers. Meeting participants wishing to speak must be acknowledged by the committee chair. Thank you all in advance for your cooperation.
Thank you, Ms. Lindo. I just want to say before we go any farther, again, the purpose of this meeting is we've been doing a series of work sessions just in terms of history and where we are today. This is our third work session that was part of a resolution by the mayor's office to talk about justice reforms for ACDC and proposals for closing the Atlanta City Detention Center. So this is the end of a series of work sessions that we've been doing. There's another resolution I'm sure you all know of that will talk about the next steps of moving that forward. And I believe that's what the mayor's office is going to present today. As soon as we finish, let me just say this. We also have about 11 public comments that we're going to listen to at the very end of the work sessions because these work sessions require no vote at this point. So we will listen to those 11 comments at the very end of the work session. So with that, our next step is to bring forth the mayor's staff, our COO, Mr. John King, and he can introduce his staff folks also. So if Mr. King is there, we will move forward with his presentation. And I hope you all have a copy of the presentation. Thank you. Mr. King.
Andre Dickens is joined.
Thank you, Mr. Dickens. Ms. Lindo, is Mr. King on the call?
I'm following up on that, Madam Chair.
Councilmember Shepherd, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Shepherd, and all council members for the opportunity to again present to you the Justice Reforms Plan. I'm John Keene, the Chief Operating Officer, and I look forward to the questions and discussion and have enjoyed and appreciated the opportunity through each of the work sessions to discuss this plan. At the heart of the plan, this plan is focused on our municipal justice system. That's worth remembering. And At the heart of the plan is an intention to stop over-incarceration and find real solutions to equity in our municipal justice system. Next slide, which would be slide 2. Our goal through all of these efforts has been to make the city safer and more equitable. And we do this by implementing some common sense justice reforms that will align the functions of our justice system with current and future needs and ultimately allow closure of ACDC. Research has shown that incarceration for low-level offenses leads to devastating impacts for individuals, families, and communities. Next slide, slide 3. The challenge we have faced throughout is that the criminal justice system is complex, with multiple interdependencies between APD, the jail, the court system, and our Fulton and DeKalb County counterparts. And making a smooth transition away from the status quo has required us to identify and consider impacts on all of these elements. As I have stated before, we appreciate the time and contributions of the stakeholders from these organizations, which has ultimately led to these plans. Next slide, slide 4. To achieve the goal, we have laid out a 5-point plan for reforms. This plan is a core part of the discussion today. Next slide, slide 5. Today we will cover the context for these recommendations, go through each point of the 5-point plan, and then finish with next steps before opening it up to questions and discussion. One thing that is important to make clear is that this plan and the agenda for today, from at least my slide's point of view, is focused on the reforms and the steps needed to transition out of the ACDC facility, not on the future use of the ACDC facility and land. Next slide, slide 6. The context is very important to understanding the plan, so we will spend some time going through the data and analysis. Next slide, slide 7. A first important piece of context is the scale and capacity and scope of ACDC. It is a 471,000 square foot facility constructed in 1995. The facility has the capacity to detain approximately 1,300 individuals. When the facility was designed and built, the city had greater court and jail responsibilities. However, in 2004, the scope of responsibilities for the city were reduced. Next slide, slide 8. Our jail does not handle felony offenses. This is an important point. Serious felonies and major crimes are booked at county jails and cases are heard at county courts. At ACDC, arrests for city ordinance violations and certain traffic offenses are booked, and the cases are then heard at the Municipal Court. Next slide, slide 9. ACDC is currently used for 2 primary purposes. First is booking individuals arrested on city and traffic charges into the jurisdiction of the court. 80% of people are only going to ACDC for this purpose. For a limited number who are booked based on an arrest, for a limited number of those individuals, we do house them while they wait to see a judge. This is also known as pretrial detention. Second primary purpose is housing individuals who are sentenced to a term of incarceration for city and traffic charges. This is about 8% of the folks who are in ACDC, who come through ACDC. ACDC is also used temporarily to hold individuals that have active warrants on behalf of other jurisdictions. That's about 13%. Next slide, slide 10. So given ACDC's 2 primary purposes, when we use data from 2019, we see that the average number of daily bed requirements was less than 4% of ACDC's capacity and therefore an average excess capacity of over 96%. The average incarceration sentence was approximately 8 days. Next slide, slide 11. From a public safety perspective, arrested individuals do need to be processed into the court's jurisdiction. However, processing does not have to take place at a jail. There is tremendous opportunity to realign our bed space with current and future needs, which should be based on the smaller number of individuals that are sentenced to a term of incarceration by the municipal court. Next slide, slide 12. So in summary, over time, we can maintain a safe and more equitable city with a change in approach to how we handle booking of arrests and how we manage individuals convicted of charges. We cannot completely do away with bed capacity as long as we have to be able to accommodate individuals being sentenced to incarceration for city or state charges. However, our proposed plan of action will align the functions of our justice system with current and future needs, including a reduction in the number of beds needed and allowing closure of HCDC. Next slide, slide 13. Now we will go through the 5 points of the recommended justice reforms plan of action. Next slide, slide 14. The first point of the plan focuses on expanding diversion offerings and implementing changes to APD practices to reduce arrests for municipal offenses where possible. Next slide, slide 15. Some of the key initiatives associated with this first point of the plan include the establishment of a community referral program through 311 for non-emergency services. As you all hopefully know, this program did launch in January. Over this year, the pre-arrest diversion program and the community referral program will be expanding citywide. In addition, we are working with county, state, and philanthropic partners to expand resources for mental health referral services, which, as we know, is a key challenge within our communities and for our police officers. Finally, based upon best practices and where appropriate, encourage the issuance of tickets in place of arrest. Through these initiatives, we can reduce bookings and processing without compromising public safety. Next slide, slide 16. The second point of the plan is focused on updating the city code in phases to remove incarceration as a penalty for certain municipal code offenses and place a stronger emphasis on community service. Next slide, slide 17. For context, most municipal code violations currently carry the following potential penalties: probation, a fine of up to $1,000 per offense, up to 6 months of incarceration, and community service. Many minor offenses are resolved with the payment of a fine. Incarceration is seldom used, which is appropriate. By phasing out incarceration and replacing it with a greater emphasis on community service, we can maintain the deterrent, we can reduce the need for jail capacity, and we can reduce the harmful community consequences. Next slide, slide 18. We would plan to take a phased approach, and right now are contemplating 3 phases. Ultimately, legislation will be introduced with the details on the specific offenses and specific changes for the council to discuss and consider. That work is being done very thoughtfully to analyze our code and the offenses and put forward a plan through legislation for council to consider. Approval of this justice reforms plan would support us moving forward with the introduction of the first phase for the council to then consider. Next slide, slide 19. The third point of the plan is focused on renovating the municipal court to support improved booking and processing of any arrests. Next slide, slide 20. Some of the key initiatives associated with this point of the plan include building out space in the lower level of the court to meet future processing needs. This would transition the processing currently being done at ACDC to that space. As we see through best practices in other cities, this space would also provide access to coordinated support services. This space would not be used for longer term detention. It would be only used for holding and processing. The space already, the lower level of the municipal court already has a dedicated holding area. And, there are no technical reasons why this space cannot accommodate this plan. Once this plan is approved, we will introduce legislation to support the funding and agreement needed to begin the next step in the design process. The design process will be completed with the municipal court leadership to ensure that it accommodates their needs and concerns. Finally, we would seek to increase the frequency of the first appearance hearings to eliminate the need for extended pretrial detention. Next slide, slide 21. The fourth point of the plan is focused on building space to accommodate the needs of the PAT 3 program and support the remaining beds needed. Next slide, slide 22. As I believe many of you know, the PAT 3 program is a reentry program established in partnership with the State Department of Corrections. The city provides jobs for eligible state inmates as part of this program. The goal is to have capacity to maintain and grow the program in the future. The intention is to leverage the planning, design, and construction costs by integrating the housing and facility needs of this program into the proposed new public safety training academy. In addition, the capacity to meet any remaining overnight incarceration needs would be at this facility. An advisory council will provide recommendations on the location, the approach, and funding source for the proposed public safety training academy for the mayor and council's consideration. Next slide, slide 23. As an interim solution, after ACDC is closed and if there is any remaining time before the new facility is open, we may pursue an IGA with the surrounding county or municipality that has capacity and humane conditions. Next slide, slide 24. Finally, the fifth point of the plan is about closing ACDC and beginning the process to implement the vision for centers of equity. Next slide, slide 25. The first 4 points of the plan that we just discussed will allow closure of ACDC and will support later discussion to finalize plans for the future use. The work done by the Reimagining ACDC Task Force and the recommendations they have put forth provide a foundation for those discussions. Next slide, slide 26. In addition, the City of Atlanta is collaborating with Fulton County and other partners on programs, services, and funding that align with this plan, meet the needs of the city and the county, and can be offered leveraging the facility and or the land. Next slide, slide 27. Now to discuss next steps. Next slide, slide 28. The key next steps include 1, accepting and adopting this plan. 2, introducing the first phase of legislation that we discussed before relating to removing incarceration as a penalty for certain municipal code offenses. And the third next step is introducing legislation to authorize the funding and agreement related to the final design of the municipal court renovations. Next slide, slide 29. That completes the presentation. We have included some slides in an appendix with information on research related to the harmful impacts of pretrial detention and incarceration for low-level offenses. We've also included examples from other cities related to the plans that we have put forth today. We thank you again for your time and look forward to the discussion and questions. That is my presentation, Councilmember Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. King. Colleagues, if you have questions, please, I see Mr. Bond. I see Mr. Shook. I'm not sure if you have a question, but I'll start off with Mr. Bond. If you have any other questions, please send them to me so that I can put you in queue. Mr. Bond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation today. And I want to, before I say anything else, I do want to say I appreciate the work that the staff in the mayor's office has dedicated to this effort. It's not easy work. So I don't want people to think that I don't appreciate what preparation they put into this proposal. But I will say that there are some parts of this proposal that I think are inspired. I think that there are other glaring, outrageous parts of this plan that I think is god-awful and wrong-headed. There just doesn't seem to be any logic to them as it applies to public safety and what's best for our courts in particular, and of course the financial aspects of how much this would cost versus, the facility we already have and other, just other considerations. But I guess what concerns me, Madam Chair, with this proposal is that it supposes or anticipates that the center of equity is actually going to happen. And one of the things I think that's missing for me personally is, before I would consider supporting any aspect of this proposal, is where is the proposal and the schematics and the financial analysis on the proposed center of equity? How are we going to pay for that? How are we going to pay for the ongoing cost of the services? I would like to see that before I consider this, because this that's on the table today fundamentally can affect our operations of government, and if it's not done correctly, could damage how our government, and particularly our courts, function. I recently, of course, with other members of council, we took a tour of the court, and it's clear that they have not, though they may have been met with, they've really not been involved in the development of this proposal, and that concerns me a great deal. So my point is, I guess my question is, when are we going to see the program analysis about how this idea of a equity center or whatever you're going to call it, when are we going to see the schematics and the fundraising or the financials on that? Are we going to see that before the council is asked to consider this plan?
Councilmember Bond, just to make sure that's a question directed to me, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Sorry, yeah, directed towards you. I'm sorry.
No problem. So I would just disagree with the fact that this plan presupposes what the decision is related to repurposing the facility and land. Obviously, as we've laid out here, it is presupposing that we close AC/DC, but as it does indicate clearly in the plan, it also understands that it will require additional discussion and decisions related to what that next decision is related to repurposing the facility and land. Of course, as I did mention and discuss, we believe that the Reimagining AC/DC task force work provides a important and solid foundation for that decision and for that discussion. And there have been clear renderings of various options put forward related to what the repurposed facility and or land could be used for, and there has been additional work done to look at what the financial costs would be for those different plans. But with all of that said, that this plan is not built upon an assumption that one of those particular plans would be the final decision. As it states in the plan, in point number 5, we do expect for this plan to lead to closure of AC/DC and for then a final decision on repurposing the facility and or land.
Well, I mean, if you're asking us to make a decision to spend the city's treasure, taxpayer dollars on these changes, on something that may or may not happen, right? So I guess what I'm accustomed to is that if there's going to be a change, then you got to show us the choices of what the change is, and what is the, the A versus B. You know, if we're going to go in the direction A that you laid on the table, why are we doing that versus, maintaining the status quo or doing something different? If we're talking about spending tens of millions of dollars to build out some of these facilities that you've got in this plan, with limited taxpayer resources, why would we do that if, I guess it's clear, or the message that I've received seems to be clear that, the mayor wants to close the facility and turn it into a bigger, better gateway center. And so if we're going to do that, how much is that going to cost versus, paying for these changes that you've got on the table? When are we going to see an analysis of that?
So a couple points worth clarifying there, Councilmember. One is, and a fair question that you asked, and so I'll directly address it, which is, why not just maintain the status quo? Well, a core part of what we've laid out in this proposal highlights why we think maintaining the status quo does not make sense. We use a very small percentage of this facility, yet we have to maintain and pay for the entirety of the facility. The facility was built in 1995. It's in need of maintenance and repairs, and we project, significant maintenance and repairs. Probably in about 18 months, we're going to start to see significant cost requirements in order to continue to maintain that facility. And so the costs for maintaining the status quo are not insignificant and are actually more significant than right-sizing our operations, both looking at ways to move our processing into the municipal court, as well as looking to build something that is much smaller, geared towards the needs of what we might have related to anybody who is sentenced to incarceration moving forward. So that is the reason why maintaining the status quo does not make sense. In terms of your second point, again, you're presupposing kind of one of the options that have been laid out by the Reimagine AC/DC Task Force. One of the options was, completely repurposing the facility, and the costs for that were not insignificant. They were significant, but that was only one of the options. There are various other options that are much, less significant in terms of the cost investment needed. And again, the purpose for the discussion today and the purpose for this plan was not to presuppose which of those options would be finalized and moved forward with.
Well, again, if you're asking us, and I guess the administrator is asking the council to consider a plan that presupposes that our current facility is not used, and we're going to make this plan would result in a fundamental change in the way that the courts would do business and also called for the expenditure of $25 to $40 million in new construction. That's correct, right? The estimates for building 2 new mini jails, one underneath the court and then one out on Key Road, right? Is that correct?
No, I'm not sure where you got those numbers from, council member.
I'm guessing from what it costs to convert the Gateway Center from it as the previous pretrial detention center is around $23 million. So if you're talking about building holding facilities, or even building out the courts, I mean, it's going to cost in the millions of dollars, correct? I mean, I may not be exactly correct, but how much is the estimate, I guess, for this construction?
Well, let me start with the municipal court. So the municipal court already has a holding area in the lower level. So we're not having to build out anything related to a holding area in the lower level of the municipal court. It already has one. It holds about 75 people. There'd be no need to expand that. That's just for short-term holding as somebody gets processed into, either into the jurisdiction of the municipal court so they can see a judge immediately for bond, or then gets transferred into, longer-term detention outside of that facility. So that already exists, does not need to be expanded. There would be the need to do some additional renovations to that space in order to accommodate what is the broader vision related to a booking and processing area. Really, that's mostly about moving around walls and other things of that nature. There's really no kind of significant major construction items. I mean, it is millions of dollars, but it's probably our estimates of, as I said before in the first work session, our estimates are between 5 to 10.
But what about this pad facility and this other holding facility you were talking about building out on Key Road? I mean, how many millions of dollars is that?
And one other point on the municipal court, council member, which is as I mentioned in the next steps, the key next step is that we would come to the council with legislation after this plan is approved that would allow us to move forward with the next step, which is further design. That further design work would finalize in conjunction with the municipal court leadership what exactly needed to be done, and would obviously then result in kind of the final details related to a renovation, which ultimately would have to come back for council to approve before that renovation could happen.
You have to have some ballpark figure of what we're talking about. We know what construction costs are. So you have no estimate.
Well, for the municipal court, I just provided you kind of a rough estimate.
Yeah, you gave me the answer on that, and I thank you for it. But I'm talking about this other work. We don't have a ballpark figure as to what we're considering approving.
Well, you're not approving funding for any facilities through this plan. All you're approving is the concept, which will then again be brought back to the council with details related to what exactly the location is. You mentioned a location, but that is yet to be finalized. You've mentioned some dollar figures, but again, that'll all depend on the scope of the facilities, because that public safety training academy would include several other key facilities related to training our police department and our fire department. And so once those recommendations are finalized, all of those details would be brought back to the council for consideration.
Mr. Bond,
well,
I'm sorry.
I'm not going to dominate.
Mr. Bond,
yeah.
We've allowed you to ask questions for over 10 minutes now. It's right at 15 minutes. Can you hold some of your questions and let other folks come in to ask questions, and then maybe we can come back?
Well, I mean, certainly, and I've just never heard anybody else being called back when they're asking questions. But I don't mind yielding, but I just want to make one last point. My point is that I'd like to ask the administration, as they have presented this plan, that they would research and present us I know they can't do the accurate figures, but they can provide us an estimate of what this might cost us to do this plan. I mean, I would be uncomfortable approving a plan and I don't even have a ballpark estimate of what it might cost. And again, I'd also like to see some more inclusion or to hear more from the court, because I could just be honest, when I went over there on the tour, they were not in support of this at all. And, they're a separate branch of government and they have dominion over the court building. So is that too much to ask, Mr. CEO? I mean, can you all provide us some estimate? Hello?
Estimates will, sorry, Councilmember, I was on mute, sorry. Estimates will be provided, Councilmember Bond, so I have no doubts about that. The question might be, I'm not sure what you're insinuating in terms of timing. Obviously, we want to make sure that if we're going to provide you estimates, that we're working with the appropriate folks to do that, and it's based on information related to, what the location and scope of facilities is and all of that. But I understand and appreciate your ask, and certainly we'll make sure that we work with our enterprise asset management team and other contractors to do as much as we can before this plan is approved.
Well, I would appreciate that. I mean, just if somebody, how much square footage you need, and if someone can just find out what the current rate of construction for a building type of what you want to build, and then multiply it by the square footage that you need, the rate times the square footage, that would be helpful. And of course, I don't want to dominate the conversation, even though we're in a work session. I thought that's what work sessions are for, but I'll yield, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. Next thank you, Mr. Westmoreland. And then followed by that, Mr. Shook, and then I'm going to jump in. I also want to recognize that our colleague, Marcy Overstreet, is with us, and Ms. Archibong is listening from afar. So we do have other council members who are actually listening also. Thank you. Mr. Westmoreland.
Thank you, Chair Shepherd, and thank you, Mr. Keene, for your presentation. 4 brief questions, I think, on a couple of the different pillars that you raised. In Pillar 2, can you go a little bit more in depth about what the process will look like to update the city code? I know there were recommendations that came out of the task force work around ordinances that whose violations would potentially be changed. But could you talk a little bit more about that? And then in the same vein, this concept of community service, how has it been used in the past? What has it looked like before? And then what do you envision it looking like in the future as we contemplate expanding it?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Westmoreland. I will share a few thoughts. We also have Amber Robinson from the Department of Law who's on the phone, who has been a part of the process and can talk through some of the details related to, I think, the details related to your question. So just to start us off, so conceptually, we did take into account a variety of different options and needs related to what we should do when we reviewed the municipal code. Ultimately, as I laid out, we looked at a variety of different types of violations and the potential penalties for those violations, and we looked at data related to which violations were used and not used, and what needed to be done in order to clean up the code, make sure it was more accurate, as well as, accomplish the goals that we had set out for this overall justice reforms plan. A key part of, some of that analysis led us to the conclusion that, ultimately incarceration for many of these low-level offenses was not used and or inappropriate, and therefore removing incarceration as a potential penalty made sense. And so the team has been doing work to look at which of the specific offenses make the most sense and what's the best approach in terms of phasing. At this point, I'll let Amber kind of go into some of the details related to the work that's been going on between her and others on that team. And Amber Robinson should be on if you all can unmute her.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Amber Robinson from the City Attorney's Office. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak today in regards to this. I think COO Keene did an excellent job describing, what we have been doing. We did during the going all the way even back to the work done within the task force, the Reimagine ACDC task force. There's been a considerable amount of research done concerning various municipal offenses, the frequency in which they're charged, the sentences that they are that they would result in from a factual standpoint, and then armed with that information, we were able to review those provisions in the code, make a determination as to whether or not they're duplicated in state law, what, in consideration of what would happen, regarding, certain behaviors if they were altered in the municipal code in reliance on the state law. And in doing so, we were able to, make certain recommendations about whether or not they're doing away with incarceration as a penalty would be a problem, from a legal standpoint or not, in regards to certain offenses. So that's basically the, kind of the process that was employed during doing this work. It went back at this point over a year and a half.
Okay, thank you. And then the community service aspect, Mr. Keene, or anybody?
Yeah, I will. I'm going to allow Jerome Jordan, who's also on the call from the Mayor's Office, Deputy Chief of Staff. So if we could unmute him, I'll allow him to speak to the details of that. There is a current community service program that is managed by the Municipal Court. I will let him talk through that.
Thank you, John. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Are you able to hear me?
Yep.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair and Councilmember Westmoreland for your question. Regarding the community service, Judge Portis, in his presentation, he did provide some information, and we also had conversations with him about their community service program. They, for example, they call it Restore Atlanta. I believe in 2019, they had about 20,000. They had 73,000 total hours completed community service. Under Restore Atlanta, it's 20,000 hours, and probation is 52,000 hours. I believe the Restore Atlanta staff is about 5 individuals. As we move forward with our plan in this proposal, we will, continue to work with Municipal Court to ensure we can identify how many resources they need, whether it's additional or just right-sizing resources, ensure they have adequate enough staff to continue a robust community service program. But really, I think this goes back to some of your original question about the ACDC task force work and our proposal. ACDC task force did a great job of sort of analyzing the lay of the land and laying forth some potential options that we can consider. Where staff is continuing to look at those recommendations and coming up with our plan. And really the idea is that there are many offenses that it's time for us to sort of review and start reviewing sort of under the current lens of how Atlanta sees criminal justice currently. And in doing that, I think the task force did a good job of doing that. And we're starting to identify, we're going to bring forth certain offenses that we can remove incarceration as a penalty for and emphasize more of community service utilizing Municipal Court's current plan. as we move forward with removing incarceration as a penalty for certain offenses, I think the work will continue, though, of sort of the analysis of the laws that are on the books to make sure that they're modernized, and we look at these codes through the lens of Atlanta currently. So hopefully that answers your question, but I'm available if you have any others.
No, I appreciate that. My last two questions are a little briefer, probably. Under Pillar 3, when you talked about potential renovations to the municipal court, you referenced that being a best practice in other cities, and I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. And then under Pillar 4, when it says to accommodate the needs of the PAD 3 program, what are those needs? So best practices in other cities around booking, and then what are the actual literal specific physical needs of the PAD 3 program?
Thank you, Councilmember. I'll take that one. John Keene, Chief Operating Officer. So we did include, just for reference as well for everybody, we did include in the appendix to the slides a few examples of other cities. There are more, but we thought these would be helpful for reference. We did highlight a few different specific locations where they had put in place supportive intake for processing and booking. One in the state of Washington related to a recently opened center that they had. Again, kind of facilitating access to services and, ultimately trying to find and connect people into services through pretrial services. In addition to that, there are other examples where cities have, San Francisco is one, Houston is another, where they have, built in the idea of things like a sobering center to make sure that people can be diverted and connected to services if it relates to public intoxication and it relates to other types of addiction. And so making sure that you provide services that are specific to that need in these types of facilities are examples of how other cities have utilized this concept to make sure that not only are you doing kind of the standard processing and booking, which is needed for anybody that gets arrested, but you're trying to make sure that you're connecting people into the services that they need to be successful and not end up back in the court. And then your second question, sorry.
Close that with PAT 3 and I'm done.
Okay. For the PAT 3 program, really there are kind of, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I'm reading kind of where your specific question came from in terms of the specific needs of that program moving forward. So the program in and of itself, the way that we have it set up currently and are looking to expand, really, based on the conversations, and there's some others, who are, have had kind of more in-depth conversations with the state and with our Department of Corrections on some of the details related to what the actual facility needs are. It's, it is not the same as kind of your standard jail cell from the standpoint of there are ways that you can make sure that it feels a little bit less like a jail cell and a little bit more like a, small apartment in order to provide housing. But ultimately the goal is that somebody is able to kind of feel like they're starting the process to re-enter back into their community. We're giving them a job. For our current PAT 3 program, we gave them jobs at City of Atlanta departments. And there is security related to the places where they would be housed. But ultimately it's about getting them closer and feeling more like they are re-entering society and giving them a job that they go to and come back at the evening and to that facility. But it is different than kind of your standard designed jail cell, if that answers your question.
It helps, yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Westmoreland. Next, we have Mr. Shook.
Yeah, sorry, I've been a little distracted here. Couple questions. Well, first a comment. You know, I agree with some of the earlier commenters who say that, well, you know, you need to sharpen your pencils and get back to us with a specific estimate about the cost of all this. You know, because, you know, if a proposed contract came to council and we were told, well, the provision of the goods or services might be $5 or less million, might be 10 or more million, we'll get back to you, it wouldn't go anywhere. So because all of these steps seem to be philosophically sort of following the no cash bail provision, which we passed, and the last time I checked, you said, well, whether to the extent to which it's met expectations or not, it's a complicated subject that has not been reviewed or properly analyzed. It's my opinion that we need to know that before we can continue these other steps. So is there anything underway in the administration to unflinchingly make that determination?
Councilmember Shook, help me understand your question a little bit. Make the determination of.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. In one of Council Chair Shepard's previous work sessions, the question was brought up. Okay, cash bail. We did it, you know, in search of some specific positive outcomes. Has it been a success? Has it been a failure? Has it been partially successful? Does anything need to change? And you said, well, the numbers we have now don't really tell the story, and more research is needed to explore this complicated subject. Are you doing that?
Well, I think my specific comment was related to the one number that was presented, which was related to FTAs, and that not telling the complete story. There obviously is more that can be done to analyze that and provide information on different criteria that you might use to define success of the program. I think we have the data to show core success in several key areas, but it's obvious that based on the discussions that we've had over the last couple of weeks, that there are some other questions that folks would like to try and draw correlations or causations to. And so that additional analysis will need to be undertaken. Since that discussion happened, has that analysis been done? No, it has not. But certainly we can do that. I don't believe that this plan is dependent upon any additional analysis related to additional questions that council members have asked about that policy.
Well, okay, and that's fair. It is to me, because I think there's a kind of a genetic sort of philosophical association and familiarity here. So let me try to be a little more specific. Is it the administration's preferred outcome that if I own a party house and torture my neighbors, that jail time would not be an enforcement option? We'll go with $1,000 fine.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on a specific offense that we haven't reviewed or put forth a specific recommendation as to whether or not.
If you can't answer that, you're not getting my vote.
Well,
same question.
Philosophically,
if I'm a serial tree killer, is it $1,000 fine, or do I look at jail time? Because you know, and I know the threat of jail times, the only thing that's going to change people's behavior. When will you be able to tell me?
There's a couple. I can tell you a couple answers to that question. One is in the proposal that we've put forward. Again, I'm not speaking about a specific offense, because we have not put forward a specific offense. There's a philosophical question that I think is worth just continuing to mention, which is the fact that philosophically, when somebody has a first offense, should they be able to, when somebody has an offense, should they be able to, for a low-level municipal offense, should they be able to be incarcerated? And the answer, as we've clearly laid out in the plan, is generally speaking, no. That's clear in this plan. But we have not put forward very specific offenses.
Now I'm not letting you off edges. Do you consider, because these are two things that are really important to my constituents, do you consider strip club owners who own party houses in residential districts, who laugh at everybody while they, make all their money, or developers who go out and illegally, treat clear-cut properties? What do you say? They don't go to jail? It's a $1,000 fine? Is that what you guys want?
You're speaking about hypotheticals. Council member, you're speaking about hypotheticals that are not definitively even municipal offenses. Some of these things can get to the point where they're misdemeanors or potentially even felonies. And so those things are not the jurisdiction of the municipal court, and therefore absolutely could result in incarceration. The things that we're focused on here are municipal level offenses and violations related to those municipal offenses.
Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shipp. Well, I have a series of questions, and so work with me. If anybody else wants to have anything to say, they can come back and ask questions. I'm still looking too. I think Ms. Moore does. Ms. Moore,
yeah,
you want to go ahead? Okay.
Yes. You want me to go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead, and then I'll come back.
Yes. Yes, so here's a couple of things I want to understand. On the municipal offenses versus the state offenses. So under your proposal, Mr. King, are we going to continue as a city to detain people for municipal offenses, and the plan is to convert the holding cells at the court? Is that what the current proposal still is?
No, Council President. So the municipal court renovation is not, it's holding areas, and that already exists in the lower level of the municipal court. We are just looking to renovate the other part of that lower level space that is not already a holding area to be the place where booking and processing of individuals takes place, not for extended detention.
Okay, so where would someone who violates a municipal offense be detained?
So if somebody violates a municipal offense and they are sentenced by a judge to incarceration, which again, as the data showed, very small number of individuals who that circumstance currently is applicable to, we put forth, as the fourth part of this plan, we put forth a recommendation that ultimately we would be developing at the same location as our proposed public safety training academy, which again, we will have recommendations brought forth to the council with the details of that. We would put forth a recommendation that there would be a facility at that location that could accommodate the needs of both the Path 3 program and anybody else who needed to be detained or incarcerated for an extended period of time, which in the case of a municipal offense, the average period of time is 8 days.
So I just want to be clear. So the proposal would be if someone had to be detained, and some of them are detained before they get to court, and then others are maybe sentenced to detention, would be that we're going to build another jail type or detention facility, I guess is best to call it, at the proposed new public safety location. Did I hear that correctly?
So yes, from the standpoint of, well, there's two elements to what you said. So one is the pretrial aspect. So we did put forth recommendation in here that we hope will pretty much eliminate the need for pretrial detention. Pretrial detention is proven to have negative impacts on families and individuals, and it's all because somebody's just waiting to see a judge in order to determine whether or not they can be released. That ultimately can be reduced by increasing the number of first appearance hearings. And so that is part of this plan. It's something that has been discussed with the municipal court, and we would look to implement that to reduce or hopefully eliminate to the extent possible all pretrial detention. The second part of your question is for the small number of folks that would need to be detained or incarcerated because of the fact that we still would have people sentenced by judges, especially for state offenses that we have jurisdiction over. For that number of people, we would still have to have a place for them to be held for their sentence. And so, yes, that is contemplated to be at the new Public Safety Training Academy location.
And so what is the timeline on that? Because I know the council hasn't weighed in on that either.
Well, and that's part of why there hasn't been a specific timeline on that. The other thing I'll mention related to the Public Safety Training Academy location is we would be bringing forth recommendations that would lay out the details of the location, the scope of work for those facilities, the financing mechanism, and ultimately it would lead to a very clear sense of what the timeline is on it. And I would expect those recommendations to be brought to council early summer, no later than early summer. We have a committee of folks that have been working on that. The mayor put out an administrative order saying that we should stand up an advisory committee, and so we have been working on that, and we'll put forth those recommendations. But the other element of the plan that we discussed today that relates to this is we did say if we needed to, on an interim basis, if we needed to, because we would seek to close ACDC so we could move forward with the decisions and plans related to that facility and that land and the future use of that facility and that land. And if the other facility was not online yet, then we could, and council again would have to approve this through legislation, but we could look to move forward with an intergovernmental agreement with another county or municipality that had the capacity and had the humane conditions in order to temporarily house the small number of people that we had sentenced to incarceration. That is a interim option that could be brought forth if needed.
Okay, that's a lot, and I'm not going to take up a lot of time on that. I think, people can hear that there's a lot of discussion needs to happen on that, but you kind of segued me to the next thing, and you said if the interim solution would be to find somewhere that they could be humanely incarcerated or detained, and we know on firsthand, myself and many other members of council went and toured the Rice Street facility, so Fulton County would not be a choice. The question is, would another county be a choice? And I haven't toured their facilities. And considering the condition of the Rice Street facility and understanding that a large portion of those people that are over there in inhumane conditions are either residents of Atlanta and or persons who committed state offenses in the city of Atlanta, could you please update me on any conversations that the administration has had with Fulton County, at minimum, related to some temporary use of some of the space? You go to the Rice Street facility and you see those conditions, and then you come to our facility and it's like night and day. And so let me start with that question, and then I have one follow-up, and I will relinquish the floor.
So, Council President, I'd just start with pointing back to a letter that the mayor sent to Chairman Pitts that I think provided at least kind of the framework for what, we believe there is opportunity to collaborate on and what we believe there is not. And so the conversations that we have had, which we have had conversations with Fulton County, and, you know, the mayor will be meeting with Chairman Pitts following the letters, as was mentioned in the letters, that they should meet and discuss in greater detail. And I've had conversations myself, several, and Fulton County has been part of the Reimagine ACDC task force, both staff and there was a commissioner part of it. But very recently, I've had several conversations with them looking at the ways that we can partner and work together to help and assist them in some of the challenges that they face. But again, there are some very specific things that do not align with our vision and the vision for, the use of that facility and that land, and that, therefore those have not been part of the discussions to date.
And that got to my point, so that you're not even discussing the temporary use of the facility. So let me ask one other question, and then I could have a million, but I'm going to let it go. One of the proposals from the task force, the last that I heard, was the recommendation to demolish the facility, our facility. Is that still a part of the plan?
That was one of the recommendations that were put forward. There was 4 primary recommendations related to the facility, or 4 primary options, I guess is a better way to put it, that were put forth from the Reimagine ACDC task force, and demolishing the facility was part of 2 of those 4 options. But a decision has not been made, as I discussed before, and as is laid out in this plan that we put forward. Finalizing that decision would need to take place. That's not kind of part of this core plan, which is focused on closing ACDC. Afterwards, discussion and decision would need to happen as to which of those recommendations would be moved forward with.
Yeah, I understood that there were 4. I've been following it very closely, and I do know they did a survey. And the last recommendation that they agreed upon was the demolition. And I just want to say for the record, if you do go to the Fulton County Rice Street facility and you go to our city facility, no one can come away with the thought that ACDC should be demolished when it is operational and clean. And you look at the functional obsolescence of the Rice Street facility, that should be the one that's demolished. I'm just going to state for the record that I'm glad, Madam Chair and committee members, you're asking good questions. And I would just ask that we be very thoughtful in considering whether or not to go with the recommendations that the mayor's office is putting forward, because it doesn't seem to me to match the needs of our citizens as well as those that are being inhumanely detained at Fulton County when we, the city of Atlanta, are continuing to take people over there to sleep on the floor and live in those type of conditions when we have a facility that at minimum, while we're trying to figure out what our future of our detention facility will be, could be used and be humanely housed, and particularly in this COVID environment. Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, President Moore.
Madam Chair, if I could make one last point.
Go ahead, Mr. King.
Thank you. I would just say, Madam President, just one thought on that. I understand your point of view and perspective on that, but I would say that it's not necessarily appropriate to say that no one would come away with the perspective that it should be demolished, because I think that discounts the hundreds of people who responded to that survey and who participated and made that recommendation, many of whom have spent time in those facilities and believe that demolishing it is the best option. I'm not saying that that's the option that we would ultimately as a city move forward with, but I do think we shouldn't discount their voice as an important voice in this process.
And I certainly am not discounting their voice, nor was my statement and an intention to discount their voice. I said specifically anyone who has had the opportunity to have the same tour of both Rice Street and the city. I believe that no one would come away with that. But again, that is a very general statement and not meant to be 100% accurate. They have not had, I don't think, the same opportunity that I've had. And if they had, maybe they will change their mind. But I certainly am not discounting their voice, which is why I specifically asked you whether demolition was a part of it, because I know that is what they are seeking. And so I acknowledge that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, President Moore. So I'm going to move on and ask a few questions myself. I'm going to go back to something that Mr. Schick, I have several, but I do have, and I don't know if you have answers to these, but one of the things I've heard continuously through the court systems and through jails is that, and this is about the failure to appear, and also a police report that was at our quarterly police meeting, our meeting with public safety, that had a report showing that a huge amount of folks who were locked up in terms of certain categories, that when they pulled their records, that 70% of them were misdemeanors, along with whatever they were charged with in terms of other things. And so as we talk about, and I know someone asked earlier in reference, I think it's Mr. Westmoreland, about, maybe I can't remember. Anyway, the study that was done by the court system showing through signature bonds, that we also know through Judge Porter is that after the signature bonds came out, a percentage of failure to appear went up extremely high. And so, and that was one of the reasons that was also asked in terms of have we did this analysis to determine where we are in terms of that. And one of the things I found out through Mr. Chief Labat and even through Judge Porter and some other folks is that our jail systems, in terms of when they pull up someone is arrested and they're brought in, that in the terms of the system, they just bring them in on signature bonds, but is there accountability in terms of looking at the process of how many people pull up their records and say, okay, you're coming in for misdemeanor, so that's not a major crime, so we're going to let you sign out on signature bond, but looking at the other cases in terms of that, and if the jail system doesn't sometimes have those records to look at that, to compare that. That's a concern for me that I think as we're looking at all these reforms that we need to be careful of, because even though these are great, we're still not at a point yet that we know categorically if this is something that as we get down the road, we can begin doing studies and analysis to see if these folks are doing other things, or if you have, y'all need to let me know about it. Have y'all done that type of study to even determine that? So I think that's important to know also. Can you speak to any of that, Mr. King?
I've had some conversations with our team on that, Councilmember Shepherd. I can't speak to the details. My preference would be able to tell you exactly how our court system today is able to answer those questions, but I don't want to kind of say something out of turn, so I'd rather have the right folks who can speak to all of those details. But it is something that I know our team, both our AIM team as well as our Department of Corrections and Deputy Chief Operating Officer Justin Johnson have been looking at to make sure, because we've heard these same things voiced, and we've been trying to kind of understand the specific elements that are accurate or not related to what we can and cannot see to make the appropriate determination. So that's what I can speak to at this moment, Councilmember Shepherd. And I'll see if I can get some additional information for you while we're on this work session.
Well, and even if it's not on this work session, what I'm saying to you all is this is something that you all need to look at before we just start making these decisions. Oh, it's a success. Everything is working great. It's going to be all right. You know, we're doing a great thing. I mean, I'm not saying that we should not go down this road, but let's make sure we're doing case studies to make sure we're going down correctly, the records are correct, and what we're doing is going to work. And from what I've heard, we haven't been looking at succinctly in terms of all this analogy I just gave you. And I think that's important as we talk about making these decisions. I think it's really, really, really important that we look at all of this together before we just conclude that, okay, it's working. That's a question for me. And if you can't answer it today, I think that's something that you all need to look at, and you need to fix that. That's something that needs to be fixed, because from what I'm hearing, it's not fixed. So that's really, really important. So get it today, but I'm putting this question. I'm going to come back and ask it, if not today, at another time where you can actually hopefully give me an answer to it. And then look at some data to determine how that works based on that. The other thing I'm going to ask is on PowerPoint number 15, when you talked about your key initiatives. And we talked about expanding resources to encourage the use of mental health referral services. Who is going to do that? I mean, we know a lot of the issues we know in terms of some of arrest or mental illness, or it could be a combination of pre-arrest diversion and all of that. And even right now, as we talk about the pre-arrest diversion, it is not actually implemented all over the city yet. It's in X amount of zones, but it's not actually implemented all over the city at this point. And also the mental services. You know, we hear a lot of people talk about we should be arresting people, we should actually be giving them services and all these particular things. Where are the resources to do that? Who's going to pay for that? And as we talk about it, and one of the things I always say to some of our folks in the community is that we know that Fulton County, one of their purviews is mental services and a lot of different things. Are we as a city looking at that we're going to handle all this separately from what other entities do? What's the cost, and how does that get done? Can you answer that for me?
I can. A couple things, and you mentioned pre-arrest diversion, and that will be expanded citywide, but that in and of itself, you know, only addresses kind of a narrow aspect of some of the mental health requests that come in, but it is an important aspect of that work. Both the community referral piece of it as well as the pre-arrest diversion piece of it. That is something that we have jointly invested with Fulton County. In addition to that, Fulton County is in the lead for behavioral health, mental health services from a local government perspective. And so a lot of the conversations that have been had have centered around how we leverage Fulton County's existing resources, look to, you know, build off of what they're looking to do and expanding their mental health capabilities and resources. We have participated with them in the past. APD, as well as others from the mayor's office, have participated with them in the past in mental health task force that looked at ways and came up with recommendations of ways to best do this work. In addition to that, we recently, in conjunction with Fulton County and the Fulton County court system, jointly supported a proposal that was awarded a grant from the federal government related to how mental health services between our teams, APD and others, can be partnered in working with Fulton County and their court system as it relates to addressing mental health issues. And so ultimately, the other kind of big piece of that is the state and working to try and make sure that we take advantage of the state's resources here, which are not insignificant. I mean, they do have the Georgia Crisis Action Line, which we have to make sure we're fully taking advantage of to deal with mental health crises issues. We have our partnership with Grady that also works to deal with mental health crises issues in the moment when our officers are responding. And then the final piece I would have on this, which is to kind of say that, you know, we want to leverage other resources and not own this completely ourselves, but we have had some philanthropy that has been interested in finding ways to see if, you know, the city can improve direct access for our police officers and for others when they're having to respond to mental health crises. So we would look to try and improve that resource that we would have some direct access and control over, and probably look to do that in conjunction with Fulton County so we could make sure that it could sustain long term. So there's a lot going on there. It's not something that, the city should wholly own itself, but we do have a responsibility to try and coordinate across all of these different resources at the county, state, and through what philanthropy is interested in providing.
Well, and I agree with you. I don't believe that the city can't own it itself just by itself. I mean, I think that's one of the problems we're having now is that all these different government entities are in silos and we're not really trying to collaborate, because this problem is a problem that's a city problem, it's a county problem, and it's a state problem. And, I was in other committees and DMAs and other things, I would tell you some of the mental illness in terms of how the state has dealt with them is really sad in terms of the fact that it closed down several entities in terms of mental illness. So we got a lot of folks walking the streets who really don't have resources. When I was at the jail last week with Chief Labat, and we had a lot of cases over there at Rice Street that was mental illness, one of the challenges they had is we have a lot of folks who are actually in jail because of mental illness. And I'm like, well, how long do y'all keep them? Their whole position was until the only state entity in the state is Atlanta Regional, what is it called? Atlanta Regional Mental Health Facility for the whole state of Georgia. So in terms of mental illness, that is the only place that we can go for mental illness. So what happens over at Rice Street, even if they have mental illness, they're holding them until they can get a space, a bed for them at the state facility. Then finally, they may sit there for months before they get a place for them at the state facility. And then once they get over there and they go to the state facility, they get them medicine, they get them rehab, they come back, and there is no place for them to go. We don't have programs that actually are dealing with this on a regular basis. So this is a vicious cycle from the county to the city to the state, where I don't believe that we're comprehensively dealing with this holistically. And it's almost like we're moving in silos and saying, well, one don't have anything to do with the other, but they do. All the stuff we're trying to resolve is all so overlapping. And so as a city, that's why I'm having problems even in terms of the Rice Street when we says, well, that's going with the Rice Street, that's Fulton County, we don't have anything to do with this. But we know for a fact that a large percentage of the people we're locking up on the streets of the city of Atlanta are going into Rice Street jail because those are felonies, those are cases that are higher. But at the same time, when you go over there and you look at what's going on, it's horrible. I don't care what they've done. No one should be living like that in a prison or a jail. And if they are in there for a long amount of time, by the time they get out, because they're not getting the services they need, they're more crazy than when they went in. I know I would be. So to that point, I'm just saying that the challenge is not for us as a city that says we've got our stuff together and this is so, but that doesn't handle, we don't handle that, we don't do this and that and the other. We can't look at it from there. And I agree with you, it's much, much bigger than just the city of Atlanta. Mental health with Fulton County, also with the state courts, county court, city of Atlanta court. We all need to be talking together. And actually, this has been such a eye-opener for me that I'm now really beginning to have conversations with people at Fulton County, the Chief Gamage, the Chief Judge over there, along with other folks, to really understand our system in terms of crime and looking at how we can do much more from public safety perspective, because it's just not a city issue. This issue, a lot of the issues that are happening in our community in the city of Atlanta are not misdemeanors. They are major crime, and we've got to look at it much more comprehensively. So I know that was a statement instead of a question, but I just had to say that in terms of just looking at how things are going. And as we're talking about, one of the things that Ms. Moore talked about was, and I'm just going to say this, and when you all were looking at, you're talking about doing something where you would actually enter opportunities where you're talking about municipal, doing a collaboration with other counties in terms of the fact that if we close ACDC, we could possibly look at another jurisdiction to put our folks in. Well, why are we not looking at that? Let me just say this. I don't necessarily support selling your jail to Fulton County. I don't. So I will go on record as saying that. But what I will also go on record as saying is that we can't, whatever we're talking about doing in terms of building out the public safety facility out on Key Road and adding a component that is for jails, that's going to take another, I would say, at least 3 to 4 years, if not more. And one of the things I've challenged Fulton County, I'm challenging them on, is that we've got to fix the jail system over there. That's not up on our purview, that's up on the Fulton County. So we need to be having collaborations with our county officials, along with everybody, to look at when is Fulton County going to build a new jail, because it is horrible, and they've been talking about this for years. So if we even help them in terms of an interim, when is that going to happen? And coming up with a time frame that if this happened, even in terms of us closing ACDC, why would we not relieve them of some of the pressure they have right now in terms of people sleeping on the floors, the conditions over there, coming up with some kind of strategic way that we can actually do both until something is built out. They're talking about building out a new jail. We're talking about building out a public safety facility. All that's going to probably take 4 or 5 years to do. In the meantime, you got people over there laying on the floors. And then we got a facility sitting over here that's vacant. And we're talking about, even if we talked about, based on what Ms. Moore said, of us talking about tearing the jails down, that's not going to happen for a while. I remember when I read this report on the justice reform in terms of the jail closing, ACDC and all of that, one of the ways they were talking about, Mr. Bond was talking about where's the money, there was a discussion on selling the jail and using some of that money to do another initiative, or either, just selling it, either selling it or tearing it down and use that money to build up these other initiatives that the mayor wants, which is fine. But bottom line is, in the interim, we got some of these things that are happening right now that's in front of our face that's horrible. With COVID-19, up past COVID-19, another eye-opener, just like we had at our municipal court, is that a lot of people over there in the Rice Street jail are sitting in jail because the court systems are not open and they can't get the people to the court. I was in the parking lot last week with a lady as I came out of Rice Street jail, and she thought I was an official controlling the jail, and she had me in a corner in the parking lot asking me what she could do. Her son had been in jail since April of last year. He has not been to court yet. And here it is now, almost next month will be another year, and he's still in jail. And because they're not having court cases. I don't know all the specifics of it, but I hear this story over and over and over again. So how do we collaborate to look at all of these particular scenarios? And by the way, that lady lived in the city of Atlanta, and her son lived in the city of Atlanta, so it was something that happened in the city of Atlanta. So I'm just saying, we got to collaborate, and I'm challenging you all that as we talk about this, that has to be something that we can try to fix this on so many levels. I don't want us to say we're going to close the jail in a year, and then we're sending our folks somewhere else, and then the jail is still going to be open, even if we close it in a year. When are we going to sell it? When are we going to tear it down? And I just don't think we should do that, put the cart before the horse, and just when are we going to get this building over in Key Street built out? I know it won't be a year. So why would we not try to work and collaborate to make these things work together, as opposed to saying we're just going to close it? Our goal was to close it in a year, do this, do that, and the other. I just got some concerns about that. There's so many layers to our problem in terms of public safety that is becoming more and more obvious to me, that we've just got to really begin to talk about this openly, discuss it, and try to figure out how we can fix it. I'm going to shut up. I don't know if you can respond to anything I just said, but we got a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Shepherd. I'll just add a couple of thoughts that I think hopefully help address some of your points and related questions. So to kind of the broader point around the timing and, the proposed use of the facility, as was discussed by Sheriff Labat in the prior work session, and is related to legislation that will come before council on Monday. Really 3 thoughts there. One is, as I mentioned before, there are ongoing discussions with the mayor and her administration with Fulton County related to determining if there are ways to work together to ensure that we are able to partner and address some of the issues that they have. There are a variety of programs and services that do completely align with the plan that we've put forward, that has been discussed by task forces like the Reimagine ACDC task force, like the mental health task force. There are elements that are clearly aligned and we can work together on. There are some things that are not, and we've been clear about that as well. But that's just the first point. There is discussion, collaboration going on. I believe that that will result in positive things. It no doubt will. The second point that I would make is, I know that it has been almost pitched that the city and ACDC are the only solution to Fulton County's problems. And, it's just worth being clear that that is not the case. There are other options to alleviate their overcrowding concerns. They themselves have put forward a jail population reduction strategy, and they laid out several ways that they are looking to do that, including establishing IGAs with other regional partners, onboarding jail expediters to improve their release processes. As the Fulton County Sheriff himself stated, and as has been discussed today, over 700 of those incarcerated at the Fulton County Jail haven't seen a judge in over a year. That's an issue that I know that the newly sworn in district attorney is looking to alleviate. It's also something that the coming into the pandemic should help alleviate. So that's my second point, which is the city and ACDC are not the only solutions to Fulton County's overcrowding issues. The third that I would just raise for consideration is, there is a fundamental belief that that land and that facility can serve a higher and better purpose for the city than increasing incarceration in the heart of our city.
Mr. King, when you said that land, what land are you referring to?
The land that the ACDC is on, the location for ACDC, sorry. So there's just a belief that land and that place in the city can serve a better and higher purpose than just expanding incarceration in the heart of the city. So those are kind of the three points that I'd make to the various points that you made, understanding, those questions and those concerns.
Thank you. Do anyone else have questions? Well, if not, I know, Mr. King, our next step, I have the legislation in front of me where you all actually introduced legislation this past Monday in terms of our official justice reform plan. So I believe our next step will be to begin to look at what you're proposing and begin to go through the series of that with the council, going through that process. I'm assuming that's going to come before the Public Safety Committee next week for the beginning discussions. I will tell you that one of the things that I have told everyone that I believe is at a point now that we shouldn't just be doing this just arbitrarily in terms of us as a council. All this legislation is so important in terms of us making sure that our residents and the community hear about it. So I'm looking at your next set of legislation going through the NPU process also, and us having more work sessions and educating not only us, but the neighborhoods and the NPUs specifically, and let them weigh in on what's going on with that also. So I'm going to ask, I'll be working for you all in terms of where we're coming forward with the new legislation. But that's where we are. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
I don't have anything to add, Councilmember.
All right, colleagues, are there any other questions or concerns? If not, I thank everybody for coming today. We have about 11 comments that we need to listen to, and then we will adjourn. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Mr. King, and your office. Thank all my colleagues for attending today and the great questions you all asked. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Shepherd.
All right. We're ready for the public comment, Ms. Lindo.
Yes, one moment, Madam Chair. Just a moment, please.
Oh.
Madam Chair, staff is having some technical difficulties, so there will be just a few more minutes before we begin the public comment.
Tyler.
A moment.
Hello?
Yes, council member. I'm
Okay.
here. They're still having some technical difficulties.
Okay. I'm sorry. I got dropped out, and so I'm back. Just want to remind people also that next Thursday we're having a work session on food truck vending on next Thursday at 1 o'clock. So please mark your calendars for that. I'm sorry, it's at 2 o'clock, not 1, 2 o'clock. Public work, a work session on public truck vending, the public right away. Thank you. We're waiting, Ms. Lindo.
Yes, Madam Chair. Staff is attempting to resolve the technical difficulties, so we should be resuming with the public comments momentarily.
All right.
Please bear with us, Madam Chair. We're still trying to resolve that issue.
I'm waiting.
Should be momentarily now.
I'm ready. I'm going to put it down.
Who is it? Wait, use yourself again.
My name is Ron Shakir. I'm a citizen who lives in the city of Atlanta in Fulton County. I am very suspect of any call to repurpose a jail to a nonprofit, a think tank, or a commission. Here's the duty of Fulton County. A sister within 6 miles, 7 miles, which legislative offices, which is in one block of each other. One street divides them. The same constituents have the same voters with the same similar needs that you would have been sitting by and allowing contracts of municipalities, counties to hold people because Fulton County Jail is overcrowded under federal watch, where people who have not been found guilty, and even if they were so, cannot or have not been able to have a bed to sleep on. That is a safety issue. That is a safety issue inside the jail and outside the jail. Because for sure, you would not be able to do the right kind of policing without considering the fact that you have no place to take them. And the place you take them could be as harmful or create even more crime. This Rex, where we are trying to go as a civilized society. This is a head-on collision. And why we would be considering it with the history that we have as African Americans in this city that has been majority and have had a consciousness to be able to deal with systemic racism. And now you're going to put people and subject people to unsafe environments in the jail and out of the jail, because you're not serving and protecting in the jail and out the jail. There's enough opportunity to do good. There's a big field to work on in, and we don't need to create another landscape and a building that need to be serving the citizens, to arrest those who we feel that have committed a crime, and to protect those who is subject and need to be arrested. I'm confused, man. Stop this action. Sell that gift.
Hi, my name is Lily Ponus. I live in Eastlake, and I'm calling about the Atlanta City Detention Center. I want to let Mayor Bottoms and the other council members know that this detention center must be closed as soon as possible. A closure date needs to be reset, and plans need to move forward as recommended by the task force in 2019 that decided the jail would be closed and turned into a wellness and equity center for the city. I personally think it's time for our city to stop investing money in Fulton County, also to stop investing money in institutions that do not rehabilitate people. They just reinforce cycles of poverty and reinforce over-policing to fill empty jail cells. and this is disproportionately affecting Black people in Atlanta. And it's a time that the city reprioritized people's well-being to actually improve the situation for the most vulnerable Atlantans. So, yeah, thank you for your time.
Hi, my name's Kaya Hutt. I'm an Atlanta resident in Virginia Highlands, calling to urge City Council to close the Atlanta City Detention Center immediately, close the jail, defund police, put that money into infrastructure and programs that actually help us meet. Thanks so much. Bye.
Hi there, my name is Asa Samradicki. I'm a resident of the city of Atlanta. I live in Grant Park on Grant Street. I'm calling once again to urge you all, City Council, to follow through on your promise and close the Atlanta City Detention Center. Something for over a year now you have been committed to. And us, citizens of Atlanta, are waiting patiently for you to follow through on that promise. Any day now, I would love to wake up to the announcement that you have in fact closed the Atlanta City Detention Center. It is not doing its job. It is not keeping our city safe. It does not need to go to the Fulton County Sheriff. It needs to be closed, raised, and repurposed as a center for wellness and freedom. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Hi, my name is Miller Reed. I'm a resident of Buckhead. I'm calling to demand that the City Council members and our mayor finally close the Atlanta City Detention Center and provide services rather than sentences to our community. We have waited far too long for this. We know that strong communities keep us safe, not new jails. Please stay the course to close the jail, implement the recommendations from the multi-stakeholder Reimagining ACDC Task Force, and break ground on a Center for Equity and a new redeemed Atlanta in 2021. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is and I'm an Atlanta resident and voter in City Council District 2. I'm calling once again to urge all City Council members and the mayor to close the Atlanta City Detention Center, not to keep it open as a city jail, not to sell it to Fulton County to reopen as county jail, not to convene a task force with Fulton County to decide what the future of the detention center will be as a jail, just to close it. The multi-stakeholder Reimagining ACDC Task Force already made a whole set of recommendations, including for the closing of ACDC and the creation of a Center for Equity. What reasons are there left for the city to ignore the recommendations of the task force that was specifically gathered to make recommendations on the future of ACDC? We already know that services, not sentences, are needed to help build strong communities that are safe and supportive for everyone. It's time for the city to move on and not move backward, to finish the process of closing ACDC and proceed with supporting residents by providing needed services instead. Thank you.
My name is Eliza Mamnoom. I am a resident of Buckhead, and I'm calling to demand that the City Council members and the mayor finally close the Atlanta City Detention Center, which they promised to do, with a reminder that 2021 is an election year here in Atlanta, and I'm committed to supporting candidates who actually keep their promises. We know that putting people in jail does not make our city safer, and it's absolutely critical that our elected officials follow through on their promises and close down the jail and redistribute the funding to things that would actually help our city, like mental health services. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kristen Morrow, and I'm a resident of Buckhead, and I'm calling to encourage you to close the Atlanta City Detention Center and follow the recommendations developed by the Fair Institute of Justice, who the city hired to come up with ideas late last year. One of the many reasons why I think the detention center should be closed, because it isn't really serving the population well, and it isn't even
incarcerating really many people. And as recently as October, there's only 23 people being admitted a day there. In addition, Black Atlantans made up 90% of the average daily population, even though they only represent 52% of Atlanta's population. So the detention center allows racial disparity in policing to continue unabated. I think it's also important to note that the average cost of keeping someone in the detention center is 17 times the national average. So if you're concerned about the financial costs involved, I think that's another reason to repurpose and do something to help people have a second chance after being jailed, or help reduce some of the factors that underlie the reasons why people are originally jailed. So thank you for listening to my message, and I really hope that you will close the detention center. Bye.
Hi, my name is Anthony Malloy. I live at 195 Randolph Street Northeast in Councilman Pierogi's district. I'm calling to ask that the City Council commit to demolishing the Atlanta City Detention Center and building a Center for Equity. I think it's important to respect the enormous time and effort that was put into the Reimagining ACDC task force by activists like Marilyn Wynn and Bill McGann and many other stakeholders in the Atlanta community who are invested in redeeming Atlanta and transforming a system that finds, arrests, and jails poor people in our community because of offenses tied to poverty. Demolishing the Atlanta City Detention Center and replacing it with a Center for Equity is a public safety strategy and a way to demonstrate your commitment to moving beyond a system that wastes money, punishing and harming poor people that need support, not jails. Thank you.
Greetings to you, council members and staff, and special greetings to you, citizens of Atlanta, monitoring your government in action between now and Tuesday, November 2nd. Ben Howard, senior advocate, public policy analyst. On the agenda for the NPR meeting last night, Wednesday, March 3rd, was a line item called committee meetings. However, unlike other neighborhood planning units, no committees were listed by name. We shed light on this illusion. Neighborhood Planning Unit R has had no public safety committee since several years ago when the Atlanta Planning Advisory Board leadership questionably gave an award to the previous NPUR Public Safety Committee chair, and she disappeared from the public scene soon thereafter. Today's public hearing on the use of the detention center was not listed on the NPUR agenda as an action item and not even listed under announcements. Public safety matters such as this and the break-ins at the Cascade Nature Preserve are kept hidden from the majority of the 20,000 residents and stakeholders of Neighborhood Planning Unit R because the NPUR 9 wants to keep attendance low and, quote, controllable, unquote. I call upon you, NPUR 9, to let the senior citizens and stakeholders along the Cascade Campbellton corridors be fully made aware of NPUR meetings, even if they have no access to the internet, and even if they are hearing impaired and visually impaired. Help the people participate in NPUR meetings, Vice Chair Anthony Robinson, Wallace Blair, Ricardo Jacobs, Albert White, Annette L. Scott, Allison Hathaway, Sherry Williams, and NPUR 9 cohorts and supporters.
Yes, this is Joe Beasley. I live at 87 Peachtree Street in Atlanta. I wanted to make a comment about repurposing the city jail. I stood with Mayor Bottoms. She made the announcement about repurposing the jail, and firmly believe that we need to follow up on that promise. There's one thing for sure that, looking at, I think it was a movie or something, if you build it, they will come. And so, while Fulton County Jail is overcrowded now by several hundred, as I understand it, if that Atlanta pretrial detention centers turned over to the Fulton County Sheriff's Office, I'll damn well bet you that it will be up to 1,300 in a short time. And so I believe that we need to, rather than cracking down and put more people in jail, there needs to be alternatives to incarceration. I think most of us know by now that it's impossible to incarcerate people, and of course what we do, if you can't find a remedy for a problem, we'll put it on the rubric of criminal justice and then incarcerate people, mostly black and brown people. And so I would urge the council to, I would urge the mayor to not let the city council dictate to her. It's like the tail wagging the dog. And if per chance this passed the council, I would urge the mayor to veto the legislation. Thank you very kindly. Joe Beasley. Bye.
That concludes the public comments, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lindo. That completes our calls and public comment for today. We thank everybody for coming. Have a good evening. Bye.